Hi, welcome to the studio. In this lesson, I'm going to be looking at water control in watercolour. So it's producing different consistencies of watercolour to give you different results, different intensities of colour on your page. So let's get into it. Okay, so I've got these 10 circles drawn out, and that's so that I can basically show you how applying a different consistency of paint into dry paper and into wet paper are going to have different effects. So I've squeezed out a little bit of paint on here, and this is butter. You know, this is how paint comes out of the tube, and that's what I would describe as butter. So this is at the high end of the scale. No water. You know, if I can tip that upside down, you know, that paint is not going anywhere. Solid. Then I'm going to, with a slightly damp brush, just moisten my brush very slightly. I'm going to start picking up some of this dry paint, and I'm going to put it in here. And you can see, because I've got very little water in there, I've got a very intense colour, but it's actually, its coverage is quite poor. Really got to work on it. You know, you'll get a really deep colour, but you've got to, great for dry brushing, you know, creating these lifting out techniques, or these highlight techniques in there. Just showing you how that, you know, it's very difficult to get a thick, you know, you can work on an area like that. So that is the butter. And if I, you know, I could probably even go darker. I've got a bit of water there, but I could go super intense just by picking up this butter kind of consistency. Now that, I'm just going to wet this area. So this is going to be our wet in wet version of that buttery mix. You're going to wet that. Now this doesn't want to be dripping wet. You just want to make sure that the whole circle is, that whole bit of paper in there is moist. Don't want lots of glistening puddles on there. Just want a gentle kind of dampness. Nice even dampness to that. Just going to dry off a little bit. Lift off some of that extra water. Now, not adding any water to my brush. Straight onto that damp paper, just with pure buttery-like paint. You see, I can keep it, it doesn't spread out very far. So I'll draw a line, you know, a few lines, spreads out a bit, quite intense. Doesn't spread very far. So this is the buttery consistency of paint. Now to go down a step, I'm going to go from butter to cream, I suppose. And this is a single cream, a pouring cream. And I'm going to try and get it into that consistency. Just try and drag that out. So that's probably a little too wet still, so I might have to put a little bit more pigment in there. Just to get this kind of cream. And I suppose this is about as thick as you can get the paint where it still runs. So it's gonna move around this palette, this well a little bit. You can see how it flows, but it's relatively thick. I'm actually just gonna thicken it up a tiny bit more, a little bit more of that. This is our cream. You know, single cream, and I'm going to put it on. You know, I've got more water, so you have slightly more water, you know, your dry brush, and instantly you can see that I get a great coverage from that. It's not leaving those white patches. It's literally just a nice, even. I'll put some more pigment in there for the next go. Then I'm going to, so let's mix this up. let's try and get some more of that I can show you in the wet in wet. You can see that is nice and creamy. You see that it does flow. It's not going to drip off my brush. You know, I could pick up all of that paint. Not going to drip off my brush. There's sticky, creamy consistency. So I'm just going to wet this area. Again, make sure it's a nice even wetting. Very easy just to dampen down one part of the page. Just make sure you've got nice even coverage. And what you'll notice as soon as I put this water down, I've got more water on this brush, so it's going to spread out further. So just doing the same again. You know, there's one dot, and you can instantly see how that water spread out, and that's to do with the consistency of the amount of water that I've got mixed on my brush with the paint. So that's your kind of your cream consistency. Still not flowing out completely everywhere, but definitely spreading further than this one. So then it's just a touch more water into here. It's going to get us somewhere close to milk. So this is a little bit thicker than, you know, than water. It's got an opacity to it. A bit more watered down. You know, if I tip this around in here, it flows quite readily. If I was to load my brush up, it might just start dripping down to the bottom there. Definitely more free flowing than cream. So just going to put this in here. It should be, I guess, a little lighter. No, not much. Just lift a bit of that out, even this up a bit. Now, a real difference, I suppose, here is that you'll notice is in when I use this wet in wet. So when you've got a wet piece of paper and then you're dropping in a milky consistency, it's going to spread quite well. And obviously, the less viscous your mixture gets, the more it's going to spread. So I want to make sure that I have got that nice even coverage on there, that I have dampened down that whole circle. And also just lifting out any excess water. And then let's just drop a bit in the middle there. You can see how far that instantly goes. You know, that's really spreading out now. You compare it to this line, stayed quite tight together. You know, that's really spreading out. And what it will continue to do, it'll actually continue to spread out while the paper dries. So as long as it stays wet, it'll probably just continue to spread out. So we've gone from butter over here, cream, milk. Next one is coffee. So I suppose if you imagine it, a creamy coffee. So whereas tea is like a pure liquid, it's almost water. Coffee, you might have a little bit more cream in there, a little bit more crema. Slightly thicker than water, slightly thicker than tea. You still want lots of pigment, but it's about changing the consistency of it. And we'll see that this will go lighter. So let's just mix this in here. I want a bit more water, and that's probably a nice coffee sort of consistency. If I was to pick up all of this water, probably start dripping. Yeah, so that's dripping fairly freely. I'll just drop that out. It's just a little lighter again. So this is affecting the value, you know, the depth of colour that you can get from a particular colour, the depth of tone you can get from a particular colour. And again, the real difference in here, you're going to see is when I start doing it wet in wet. You've got this lovely wet base. Again, not too much water, so I've probably got a bit too much water on there. Just going to lift out some of that. So your paper's damp, not pooling in water. You don't want puddles of water, you just want a nice even damp surface. And then watch how this, you know, this loose liquid is, if I put a drop in the middle there, probably almost going to spread out to the edges. So there's one drop. just to show you how far that spreads and how how quickly and evenly it spreads out. So if you're looking for fur in an animal, or or a soft background, colours mixing together, using a kind of coffee colour is going to blend those colours in together far more. Then the last one is tea, and I mean that's just basically about as weak and insipid a paint as you can get. Useful for washes, in backgrounds and for starting washes. Very pale, very loose. If I was going to lift this up, it's definitely going to start just dripping off. Showing it in here, it flows around. It doesn't really stick to the palette, doesn't grip the palette. That'll all flow down basically into the corner. And then, oh, bit of a splash. So applying this, it should just be a little lighter. You see how we got that really light shade in there. I'll just dab off. And that's your tea consistency. And then again, just going to show this in a wet in wet situation. Making sure that paper is damp, not too wet. So lifting off any puddles. Just drying my brush and lifting off some of those puddles of water. And then this, a lot of paint in there. It's going to disperse. There we go. Look, a couple of drops. A couple of drops in there, and you can just see it running all the way. Lovely, kind of soft bleeding edges. And that's it. So that's what I want you to just, this is how I and a lot of artists will refer to the consistency of paint. So when we're about to play it, you say, about to apply it to the paper, you might say, I've got the consistency of butter here. So that's a real dry. So we've got butter. We got, this one is cream. This one is milk. This one is coffee. And this one is tea. And just think about the paint consistency in those terms. Super wishy-washy tea. About as light and the least viscous kind of colour you can get, right the way through to the thickest, butteriest kind of paint straight out of the tube, and your kind of variations in between there. So I hope that goes a little way to explaining water control and how it affects the colour, the intensity of the colour, but also the way that the paint moves on the page. So drier paint, less water in there, so buttery consistency. It's going to be really intense, really good for dry brushing, leaving those little skip marks that you get over here. Whereas this tea watery wash is great for a background or for softening a shadow or creating a shadow just with an overlay or something. So super good to be able to understand this consistency and just have those terms in your head. Butter, cream, milk, coffee, tea. Hope that's been useful for you. There's a whole lot more videos on this channel looking at watercolour painting, all the different techniques, paper, brushes, paint, the whole lot. So hopefully I'll see you in some of those.